One of the most engaged and engaging sermons that I've preached in the last decade, I'd like to say controversial, but I don't think it was, but one of the most engaged sermons that I did was a year ago Easter, in Easter of 2024. I talked about Taylor Swift. For some reason, I didn't think that would bring a big hubbub, but it kind of did. It was on Easter Day, and I talked about this. I showed the Capital One commercial where the camera is kind of going through all of these people, and then you don't realize until the very end when you see them in the elevator that all of those people were actually Taylor Swift. And I talked about how Taylor Swift has all of these kind of personalities within her, as we all do. And I said, the thing about Taylor Swift is she seems like a pretty good person. She's a big star that's really never been embroiled in any controversy. She gives away a bunch of money publicly and secretly. And so it seems like, first of all, she's relatable because so many people can see themselves in her. And secondly, she seems to always try to have the best part of all of these different parts of herself, the best part of herself, rise up. And that's what Jesus calls us to do on Easter with the risen Christ. What's the best part of us that's supposed to rise up? I thought it was a theologically sound sermon. I had parents tell me that this sermon was the sermon that helped them with their children engage more in a conversation than any other sermon that I'd ever preached. That it was very much a good thing that young people could relate to this sermon and families were having conversations because Taylor Swift was a helpful example for them. But truth be told, I also got late night emails with all caps lock saying that, how dare I, and calling me a Swiftie. I'm not, but calling me a Swiftie as if that were a bad thing. And basically saying that she's unworthy to talk about in church, which I thought was ironic on Easter because we talk about Judas Iscariot the whole week, right? So anyway, the reason that I raise that is because when we do these worship series, we write them way ahead of time, and then something generally, by God's grace, appears in the news that affirms what we're doing. And this week, past couple of weeks, it was Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift was on a podcast, you might have heard, with her soon-to-be fiancé and her soon-to-be fiancé's brother, and they spent 2 hours talking about this album that she was dropping. Anybody heard that happened? It was kind of a thing. Well, in the midst of that, there was a quotable quote that I thought was amazing and that actually reflects exactly what we're talking about. Taylor Swift said this. She said, "Think of your energy like a luxury item. Not everyone can afford it." This is exactly what we're going to be talking about for the next 6 weeks. But instead of energy, use the word attention. Think of your attention as a luxury item. Not everyone can afford it. We are going to go on and explore, understanding that your attention, what you focus on, is the most valuable resource that you have. Not your money, not your time, but your attention is singularly the most valuable resource that you have. And you have folks clamoring for your attention. So, we're doing this series. Again, it's called Pay Attention. We've got our camera with the lens, right? We're talking about this because it's relevant for today. I have noticed in you all, I've noticed in society, my thoughts about this have been pretty deep for a long time now, and now academic research is showing that we are less happy each year that passes. The more technology that we have before us, the less happy we are. And now academic studies have shown exactly how unhappy we are. The more technology in our lives has led to these things: less social engagement. We don't go out into the front yard and talk to our neighbors the way we used to. We just simply don't. We spend more time alone, more time isolated, more time with our device. We report much higher levels of anxiety and stress. More people are more stressed, more people are more anxious, more of the time, and it gets proportionally higher the younger the person is. The more the person's been raised with technology, the more stressed they are. We find ourselves having much lower self-esteem, especially younger generations. Why? Because social media is us comparing ourselves to others. And that's super hard, especially for young people. As I've said over and over and over again, Social media is looking at someone else's highlight reel when we're living our blooper reel. And we feel it, and it makes us feel worse about ourselves. We have less personal time because the time that we used to spend healing and resting and reflecting, actually thinking about the choices we made, we don't spend time doing that anymore. We go home, we sit in the chair, and we go like this. And it takes our focus away from that processing and that healing time that we used to have. And the last is this thing called the hedonic treadmill. It's hedonism. We only feel good when we get something new. If it's not a new device, it's a new connection we've made on social media. It's a new game. It's a new thing that we've bought online because we don't go to stores anymore. We are addicted. We are on this treadmill of only feeling good when we get something new. And we no longer inherently feel good about ourselves. This is where we are. And this is why we're talking about it. In essence, we are always here but not present. We are here but not present. I mean, I had the good fortune on Friday night to go to the volleyball game, and I was way up in the nosebleed section, and I saw somebody in the front row, this old couple, and the woman never took her face off her phone. In the front row at the volleyball game. She was there but not present. Look at kids in coffee shops talking to each other. Right? We are always here, but never fully present with one another. And it's killing us. Here but not present is actually a tagline from this book called The Siren's Call by Chris Hayes. Now, Chris Hayes is a political pundit, and he has his beliefs and his views. But this book is actually an academic book on attention. What has been termed the attention economy. And Chris Hayes talks about the war going on. The people who live inside your phone, they are at war trying to get you to look at them. The war for your attention. And he wrote this book for one reason and one reason only, to bring peace in the midst of that war. To try to get us to get some perspective on our attention. Well, so let's dig into it. Attention. When I was a kid, the number of people who told me, Gregory, pay attention, was infinite. It was like they were screaming at me with a megaphone. I was a kind of a spastic kid. I was probably ADHD before that was a thing. They were like, pay attention, right? And I couldn't control yourself, pay attention. I couldn't control myself. And I couldn't really pay attention. But that's the sum of how we collectively believe that attention is. But attention's much more than that. Chris Hayes would say it's complicated. There are levels of attention. So let's learn a bit about attention. There are three basic kinds of attention. The first is voluntary, what I was just talking about. Your ability to control your focus to a degree. We can only to a certain degree control what we focus on. Then there's involuntary attention. That's those things that draw us from our attention. Involuntary attention is if the person behind you started whispering your name, even though I have a mic on and I'm very loud, if somebody behind you starts whispering your name, you're not listening to me anymore. The perfect example of that was last Wednesday. When Pastor Michelle was using the pulpit to preach, and she was standing right here preaching her sermon, and we had a toddler who got out, a single mom or a mom who was here by herself with her baby in a car seat that she was tending to. The toddler got out and made the run and got down to here, and when mom came out of the pew, she made the dash across the platform, went behind the curtain, and it was like hearing woo in the congregation. In all of her wisdom, Pastor Michelle knew, in her pastoral wisdom, to just stop talking. Because nobody was going to listen to a word that was said until that baby was wrangled. That's involuntary attention. And then there's social attention. Social attention is the attention that we need because we need other people to engage with us. You don't think, well, I don't need that. Yes, you do. It's baked into you. It's hardwired. Think of a baby. right? We all were infants once, and at some point in time, infants, they need to get their needs met. And so either by cry or by coo, they coo or cry, and they get you to pay attention to them. I'm looking at one right now. Right? And that is a good thing. But we all have that need, and it never goes away, and that's what social media captures. So the folks who live in your phone, they use all three of these things against you to engage you. And you're kind of powerless against them. And so what you need to do is to steward your attention. And this is a foreign concept to most of us. We don't believe that our attention is something that needs to be stewarded, but you need to steward your attention. Right? If you don't, you're toast. And this is not a new thing. Jesus talked about exactly that. Again, I invite and encourage you to turn to 884 in your Pew Bible because it really is helpful. Here we have this text of Jesus. It's the Sermon on the Mount. It's some of our most beloved teaching, and he's talking about this mishmash of all these kinds of things. And yet in this time, he's talking about like forgiveness, and he's talking about fasting, like even your spiritual life, you can get wackadoodle if you do it wrong. And then he says, do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. And then he says, your eye is the lamp of your body. And if your eye is unhealthy, you're going to be unhealthy. And then he starts talking about money. Well, that was the most important issue in Jesus' day, was money. I invite you, as you read this, to use attention instead of money. And you get the point of what I'm saying. Right? You cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve your phone and God. You cannot fall victim to your phone and serve God. Now then he goes on and talks in 25 and onward about, don't worry, God's got this, but you need to partner with God in that. You need to steward what God has given you. And that's the reason why we're having this series, is to help you steward what God has given you. Again, it's a hard thing for us to accept because it's snuck up on us. That's the thing. The world has changed so fast, it's snuck up on us, and we don't realize that. The analogy I would use is life used to be, and I think I've used this before, just bear with me. Life used to be like years ago driving westward in South Dakota. That's what life used to be. With regard to the amount of data and information we had, it was like driving westward in South Dakota. There wasn't that much to see, there wasn't that much information, but everybody knew where Wall Drug was. There wasn't that much information, but there was some. Now, with the advent of the phone and the internet and everything that connects us, now life is like driving down Main Street in Bangkok, Thailand. There are more signs, more everything than we can comprehend. We are flooded with so much data, we are overwhelmed. And what do we look at? Generally the sign that blinks the fastest and is the brightest. And that's not necessarily the best sign to look at. And so we need to steward in the midst of all that. What do I really need to see? And we have a hard time doing that. The folks who live in your phone have monetized your attention. Everything that you look at, everything that you see, every ad, every web page turns into dollars for them, and they win when you continue to engage. And it traps us, and it's killing us, and Jesus wants for you a different way. Perfect example is from this week. How many of you know the Philly Karen? This is her having grabbed a baseball out of a kid's hand and looking very much like a spoiled 10-year-old. Now how many of you know who I'm talking about? Yeah, the internet is ablaze. Everyone's focused on her. Why? Because we can't figure out who she is. So everybody wants to know. It's this great mystery. For those of you who don't know the story, it was in Miami. She went as a Phillies fan to watch the Marlins play the Phillies. A home run was hit in her general direction, and she doesn't know the rules. I don't know why she's the only person who doesn't know the rules, but when a ball's hit into the stands, it doesn't matter if it's come to you. It matters whoever grabs it first gets it. We all know this, right? Okay, good. She doesn't. There was a ball that was hit and landed in the row in front of her by a Phillies, Harrison Bader, and there was another guy, his name was Drew Feltwell, who was 10 seats away. They were empty seats. He just walked down, grabbed the ball, picked it up, brought it back to his son, Lincoln, and handed it to him, hugged him, and she came over to him in a rage, grabbed his arm, and started spewing profanities in his face. And he just gave her the ball, which went against everything that I felt in that moment. And here's the problem. It's not what happened. The problem is what we're focusing on. What is the internet? What are we all focusing on? Her. Some people are focusing on the Phillies because he got, it turned out okay for Lincoln. We can go to the next slide. It turned out okay for Lincoln. He got to meet Harrison Bader, get a signed bat. It was cool. He did okay. Everybody's focusing on her or him. Know what we're not focusing on? Dad. Drew Feltwell. I mean, I kind of looked at him and said, what was he doing? What was he thinking? You don't give in to that. Here's what Drew Feltwell said. I think we got it on the screens. He said, I was in a fork in the road. Either I do something I regret. Matter of fact, he even said, what was I supposed to hit her? He said, I couldn't do that. He said, I either do something I regret or I show my son how to de-escalate the situation. And then when asked about the Philly Karen, he said, I refuse to bash her in front of my kids. I cannot do what I did and talk bad to her. And then when asked about the controversy online, he said, just leave her alone. The internet has been cruel enough to her. Show of hands, anybody remember Steve Bartman? Lives could be ruined. Google it if you haven't. We are focusing on the wrong things. Not on her. Not on some baseball team giving a bat. But we need to focus on a dad who, in a critical moment, did exactly the right thing. He discerned, he stewarded his attention, and because of that, he reflected the unconditional love of Christ. Let us do the same. Amen.